Okay, so welcome everybody. Great that everyone can join us today. My name is Kari Cohen. I'm the projects branch chief here at national headquarters for NRCS. It's my team that has national responsibility over the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Oh, did we lose the slides? Russell, can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, very good. We're here to talk today about the alternative funding arrangements provision of RCPP. We've got a funding announcement that's on the street right now, and we're going to walk everyone through the major elements of what an AFA project and proposal is all about. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some questions. Certainly encourage folks to put questions in the chat box throughout the presentation. But other than that, we're asking everyone to stay muted. If we do have time at the end, we will welcome any verbal questions in addition to the chat box. Our goal is to post a FAQ document to the RCPP national website here in the very near future with all of your questions and answers, because my bet is that we're not going to be able to get to them all here in our appointed hour today. You may have heard that we are recording this webinar. We'll also post that to the website in case you want to watch it again if it's so stimulating, or if you have colleagues or other partners that may want to watch the webinar. Okay, so without further ado, we'll just jump right in here. And I'm going to start off the webinar today with the first 9 slides or so, and then my colleague here, Seth Fiedler, is going to take over. So we'll do a little bit of RCPP 101 for those new to the program. So RCPP is really a partnership program. As you can see here, it's got partnership in the name. And what we try to do is co-invest with our partners in targeted, innovative natural resource solutions. The very best RCPP projects are those where what NRCS is bringing to the table is matched and equivalent to what our partners are bringing to the table, and that's really what we like to see. Whether it's an AFA project, as we call it, an alternative funding arrangement, or just RCPP Classic, which is the traditional RCPP component, these are the 4 principles of RCPP that we want every project to embody. One is impact. We're looking for projects that really are going to have a on-the-ground conservation impact, an impact on farmers' bottom lines, an impact on their communities, all the way around. Second is partner contributions. I mentioned we're looking for projects where partners are really bringing a lot of value-added contributions to the table to complement NRCS funding and technical assistance. Third is innovation. It's a word that in many ways is in the eye of the beholder, and there's lots of ways to be innovative within RCPP. Certainly these AFA projects kind of have innovation sort of inherent in what they're trying to do, as you'll see in many ways, and we'll talk about today. And finally, partnership and project management. We found through the years that this is really critical. These are often multi-million-dollar projects with up to 30 partners involved. Being able to manage the relationship with NRCS and with all the partners and deliver on the conservation and the partner contributions is very challenging. And certainly this partnership and project management piece, we're looking for partners that have the capacity and capability to deliver, especially on these AFA projects where there's even more responsibility on the lead partner. So what is an alternative funding arrangement? This concept was actually first included in the 2014 Farm Bill, and we do have a couple projects from those early years that are what we consider AFA projects, but the concept was really expanded in the 2018 Farm Bill. It provides for alternative project structures compared to the way we run RCPP Classic, which is basically NRCS, entering into producer contracts and easements and things of that nature. AFAs are really run in a very different way. And here is a quick snapshot of what that looks like. In RCPP Classic, again, NRCS has this direct relationship with producers through contracts and easements. We have relationships through lead partners as well, certainly through the partnership agreement, but it's sort of even-handed. Here in alternative funding arrangements, it's quite different. NRCS's only real relationship in many ways is with the lead partner, and the lead partner has the bulk of the responsibilities for carrying out these AFA projects. Talk a little bit about the structure here, about of how an AFA works, and we'll come back to some of these concepts later. But the first thing that happens when we make an award is we sign a programmatic partnership agreement. We call it a PPA with the lead partner. And that PPA basically spells out how the project's going to be carried out. There's actually no funding associated with the PPA, and we do that for a very specific reason. There's a lot more flexibility if we don't have funding tied up in that partnership agreement, and every time we try to do something, we have to go back and amend that agreement. So the PPA kind of sits as an umbrella agreement over top of the project. And really the supplemental agreement, which is a new funding vehicle for NRCS, but the supplemental agreement is really what transmits funding, in this case, directly to the lead partner. And the lead partner can go and carry out financial assistance activities with producers, landowners, and also technical assistance activities. And you can see over here in smaller boxes is NRCS, because for these AFA projects, really, our design is that NRCS has a smaller role than we do in the RCPP Classic. NRCS does maintain at least 5% of the technical assistance funding, or sorry, 5% of the overall funding of the project from NRCS to carry out technical assistance activities related to project management, producer eligibility, and some other things. And we'll talk about that here as we walk through. Some basics about the funding announcement that's out there. Proposals are due the day before Memorial Day weekend, so that's Friday, May 28th, 2021. This year, we have up to $75 million available. You'll notice that's $25 million above what we made available last time we did this in FY 2020. Nevertheless, we are still statutorily restricted to a maximum of 15 awards. We did spend the $50 million last year on 10 awards, just to give you some context. Projects can be a maximum of $10 million request, and a minimum, I think, is $250,000. This year, we've written a couple special considerations into the funding announcement, and it will come as no surprise to folks who have been paying attention to the new administration's points of emphasis. One is climate smart agriculture and forestry. We say in this funding announcement that we intend to spend a significant portion of the available funding on projects that are committed to carrying out climate smart ag and forestry activities. Second is urban agriculture. We don't have a great history in RCPP of funding urban agriculture projects, but we want to do more. And we certainly encourage applications from partners working in urban agricultural landscapes. Third is historically underserved producer engagement. We provide special consideration and additional points to projects that engage with historically underserved producers and encourage their participation. Historically underserved producers are limited resource producers, socially disadvantaged producers, veteran producers, and beginning farmers and ranchers. And so, again, these are 3 points of emphasis that we've written into the funding announcement, and our applicants would do well to pay attention to these. All right, I think this is my last slide, and then I'll hand it over to Seth. There's a few things that are new for AFAs. If anyone applied last time in 2020 or has been paying attention, I'll just highlight a few of these here, and then we might jump into these in a little bit more detail, some of them anyway. First of all is that we revised the critical conservation areas back in 2020, last summer, and this AFA announcement includes those revised CCAs. So you'll see the Northeast Forest and Waters CCA and the Western Waters CCA. Just wanted to flag that for folks. Remember that we have to spend 50% of our money in the CCA fund pool and also in the state multi-state fund pool. And all of that is laid out in the funding announcement. We also have new policy on AFA easements. When we wrote the 2020 funding announcement way back in 2019, we did not have time before we wrote that thing to actually work with our easements colleagues here at NRCS and develop our policy. So it's very explicit in this funding announcement that's on the street that we will pay up to 25% of the value of an easement, and that these AFA easements will have no government right of enforcement. Effectively, these are really, again, just because of the way the AFA is structured, these are meant to be partner-led projects, partner-led easements. And so this is the easement policy we settled on. There are no options here in 2021 and moving forward. Third, producer cost share cannot be counted as partner contributions. This is a change from the 2020 funding announcement, and it was made as a result of the RCPP final rule and how we came down on this provision in that RCPP final rule. So no longer can producer cost share be counted as partner contributions for the overall project. And finally, we updated the RCPP AGI waiver policy with some changes that we made last summer. RCPP projects are now have two options available. One, at the time of when you submit your proposal, you can request what we call an applicability waiver, which means that AGI does not apply to your project at all. Folks need to submit a justification for that. And then, if you get an award through our negotiation process for the partnership agreement, but that is one option. If partners do not choose to do an applicability waiver, you can have producer level AGI waivers, just like we have for our other Farm Bill programs. So we have two options, and they are detailed there in the funding announcement. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Seth, who's going to handle the remainder of the slides.
Thank you, Kari, and thank you everybody for calling in and listening to our call today. Just to sort of frame the next part of this presentation, we're going to sort of jump to real low detail and then kind of zoom back out to high level detail several times. So if you see something that raises a question and I don't answer it in a few slides, please do ask a follow-up question, but give me a second because I'm going to try to sort of build on the slides as we go through, and it's kind of iterative. So first off, just kind of go backwards a little bit and build from what Kari was saying. What is a successful AFA project? What would a successful AFA proposal demonstrate to the reviewers? Well, when we look at the proposal, it needs to be real evident that the partner is not proposing our NRCS-led producer contracts. You really have to clearly demonstrate that you, as the partner, are going to be the producer contractor, if you will, and you're going to interface with those producers on our behalf. Therefore, accordingly, of course, it must rely on your expertise, not ours. And your expertise has to span the gauntlet of environmental assistance in the particular activity that you're talking about. So if you're talking about land management activities with a rancher to work on ranch improvements, you need to know how to reach that rancher. You need to know how to contract with that rancher. You need to know what practices you're going to help that rancher put on the ground and what's involved in those practices, how you're going to pay for them. Everything, right? So the more you can present a compelling portrait that you as a partner have the ability to hit every step of the RCPP program with a producer especially, we'll help you through the NRCS side stuff, but the producer side stuff is really on you. So if you can demonstrate that in your proposal and your project is going to embody that, that's going to be a good AFA project. Really, NRCS involvement is very limited in theory. We're working very closely with you, the partner, on project and project management. We're, of course, doing program management ourselves in the background. So we're going to move money around and stuff like that. We're going to work with you on the project management, the scope. We're going to work with you to develop specific supplemental agreements for technical assistance initially and later on for financial assistance. And we are going to in the negotiations of those supplemental agreements, we're going to work with you to define very specific eligible activities and ensure that the payment methods that sit behind each of those eligible activities are valid. Next slide, please. Thank you, Kari. So in the statute, there are some examples of projects. There are 4, and I'll cover each of them and try to frame them for you in a AFA construct, portal construct kind of a way, and start to get you thinking about how you would evolve your proposal based on which of these 4 it might look like. So if you have a project that is really addressing natural resource concerns directly with producers, on the ground watershed type work, or on the ground habitat or farm improvement related work, that's going to land in this first bullet, and it's going to be sort of a land management, rental, easement type activity project. In an AFA construct, the real difference, these projects look the most like traditional classic projects, right? Because really you're contracting with to provide very similar services to the things that an RCS might, but hopefully you're using some sophisticated targeting tools, some unique contracting mechanisms, something that's going to make it AFA specific. Then you get to the slightly more AFA unique projects, these watershed projects, where you're making infrastructure improvements that may or may not be on eligible producers' land, but they're obviously for the direct benefit of eligible producers. In that case, you're building a project around the direct benefit to those eligible producers and the fact that you, as a partner, can provide some streamlining in the delivery of this watershed project that's going to make it work better than it might if it were a classic RCPP water or a classic NRCS-led watershed project. So again, the idea here is what can you do and how are you going to do it uniquely in RCPP? We're trying to get you to think through the whole process. Let's look at the 2 more uniquely AFA projects, Kari. Thank you. So the statute also says that projects can use innovative approaches to leverage federal investment in conservation that include pay for performance, pay for success, and environmental marketing approaches. Obviously, these are the biggest steps away from an EQIP contract or an ALE contract that we might do in Classic, that we might mimic in Classic. Here we're saying, okay, you partner may bring to us in an AFA project a truly unique method for giving dollars to producers, but even though you're going to give those dollars to the producers through pay for performance or pay for success or an environmental market approach, you have to know what they're doing, and you have to be able to verify for us that those activities that the producer is doing on the ground to earn their payment actually meet a technical standard that we're going to agree to. And we'll come back to that technical standard in some greater depth. But the idea is that just because it's pay for performance, it's not just writing a check. There has to be a demonstrable output that you're going to measure for us and you're going to present to us and we're going to pay based upon. And that, I would say, is very similar for the final type of statutory exampled project, which is this something else that might be consistent with a covered program authority, but isn't quite a covered program. Doesn't fit Classic. Tell us how you're going to do it. Again, you're not just going to go out and do good things and pay money. You're going to have to tell us very specifically what it is you're going to work with a producer to get done, and how are you going to make sure that it is done and that it meets specs and that the costs that you pay out to a producer and or bill us for are all very defensible. So next slide, please. So one of the added wrinkles of AFAs that the statute brought to us is that they're not outright grants. People want to think of them as outright grants because it kind of looks like a grant. You read the APF and you're like, oh yeah, they want me to do cool work and with producers, and then I'm going to bill them and they're going to pay me. It's not quite that simple in RCPP because we are not a grant. What we have to do, and you're going to have to help us with, is all the sort of normal Farm Bill eligibility stuff that's listed in these first 4 bullets, sub-bullets. The benefited lands, the producers' lands that are being benefited here, need to be HEL compliant. The producers need to be in compliance with the wetland provisions of the Farm Bill. The producers can't be debarred from receiving payment eligibility. They have to be AGI eligible. And before we do any work on the ground, we have to make sure that all the environmental requirements, including NEPA, the National Historic Preservation Act, and the Endangered Species Act, are all met before we turn a blade of dirt, right? That's not a partners aren't able to do all these things, but you're going to have to lay the groundwork with our staff to make sure they're all in place before you go out and authorize a producer to do something or do something on that producer's behalf, because otherwise we can't pay you for the work. So the construct changes to, okay, NRCS no longer makes sure the producers are eligible and the land's eligible. We work with the partner and make payments to the partner when all those things happen. And again, we'll get into more detail on some of these. We can't just do anything in RCPP. And again, this is reflective of the fact that we're not a true grant program. We are bound to the covered program authorities. Our covered programs are listed in the statute and are things like EQIP and ACEP and HFRP and PL 566, the watershed program. Those are the only real authorities we have, with the exception of that added bullet for pay for performance that we talked about previously on the statute. So we're limited to covered programs and those very specific sort of bumps outward to them from the RCPP statute. And then finally, we can't pay generically. We have to pay based on a very credible and auditable payment process. So while we are going to negotiate some of our payments in AFA projects at the supplemental agreement level, there are very strict limits on those negotiations, and we'll cover those a little bit more as we go through as well. Next slide, please. So first off, before you listen to me ramble about RCPP activities anymore, but let me just list them off for you and describe in a little more detail what they are and how they relate to those covered program authorities. Land management is one of our 4 AFA activity categories. This closest parallel in RCPP, in pre-RCPP world is the EQIP program, or the Conservation Stewardship Program, or the Land Restoration component of Watershed Program, or the Wetland Restoration component of a Wetland Easement Program. Basically anything that's between you as a partner and a producer that benefits that producer's land directly through a management activity that involves manipulating the world is going to be a land management contract. A land rental contract really looks more like a CRP contract. That's a contract between you and a producer where you might pay the producer to defer use of a land for a resource benefit. Key is a resource benefit there, right? We're not just paying for deferral of use. Entity held easements are the only easement type available in AFA. We don't provide for US held easements. And an entity held easement looks pretty much like it would in ALE, but allows you as a partner or your entities, if you're actually going to contract with different entities to hold easements than yourselves, allows the entity that's holding the easement to write a conservation easement deed that not only does ag land like ALE, but it could do wetlands or it could do some kind of mixed use purpose. It's whatever you guys put in your deed. What's the minimum deed requirements that we're going to impose? And we'll come back to those later. Finally, watershed or public works projects, that's your big infrastructure projects. They're going to need a full-blown plan and environmental analysis. There's some specific language on this in the APF. Those are your larger projects that may actually conceivably sit on public land and exist for the benefit of downstream producers, for instance, or adjacent producers in a canal type system. Again, needs to have a tie to eligible producers, can't be solely for the public good. Next slide, please. So a lot of our requirements in AFA are very similar to Classic, and those are listed out here. Basically, the statute requires us to spend half of our AFA apportionment between the state and multi-state pools and the collaborative conservation area pool. Projects have to have direct conservation benefits, and they need to address resource concerns for eligible producers on eligible lands. Significant partner contributions are critical. The stated goal is 1-to-1. We can select projects below 1-to-1, but they tend to get docked during the ranking process. It may be more appropriate to scale back the size of your ask to get to the contributions you can provide if you go too low. Kari mentioned the funding mechanisms. The overall program financial assistance / technical assistance, FATA split, is 70% financial assistance and 30% technical assistance, which basically means for each 70 cents that we pay you to get on the ground, between you and us, we can only spend 30 cents to do that. That's the line between technical assistance and financial assistance. Financial assistance is dollars on the ground. And the APF goes into the specific types of TA, enhancement and implementation TA. And we'll cover a little bit more on the lines within implementation TA in a second. And finally, the eligible partner list is the same, and I believe it's a slide coming up here in a minute. These are the eligible partner types. They are listed in the statute and sort of encapsulated in the portal in fewer words than these, but the drop-down list in the portal should align with this. If you have any questions as to which type you are, work with your state coordinator. The one that I'll highlight is the third to last, an organization or entity with an established history of working collaboratively with producers on agricultural land as determined by NRCS, blah, blah, blah. That's a real vague one. If you find that that is your only path to qualification as a partner, please ensure that your proposal reflects why you think you have that established history and meet one of those two bullets below. Otherwise, your partner entity could be determined ineligible just due to lack of that detail. Next slide. So what in an RCPP AFA project, what is a partner really basically supposed to do? Well, everything. You're supposed to work with producers to establish their need and interest in the program, make sure they have eligibility records with the Farm Service Agency. You're going to have to rank and select applications in a fair and equitable way that doesn't provide anyone the opportunity to accuse NRCS or you of bias along the way. So if you have pre-selected projects or beneficiaries in mind, make sure you put those in your AFA proposal. You know, a watershed project might only have one dam that's going to work. Put that in your proposal, avoid the necessity for a subsequent ranking. If you're going to do selections during the term of your project, you need to actually have a ranking and selection process, and you need to have enough detail in that to make sure that we can feel like you've got an understanding of the fair and equitable characteristics that have to go into selections. You also have to be able to develop and deliver producer contracts, the plans that go behind those, the technical details that the producers need to implement them. This is sort of the meat of what NRCS does, particularly for our land management contracts. And now you're going to be doing it. You're going to have that expertise in order to do it. And just the simple ability to do the contracting in addition to the technical assistance. You got to be able to manage the money. Next slide, please. So what is the basic expectations of NRCS? Well, it's kind of the small part of everything that is everything else. We are going to be, like I mentioned previously, managing the project and the funds with you. We're going to be working with you on eligibility along the way, both for the technical assistance deliverables and the financial assistance deliverables. And we have a responsibility to the taxpayer to make sure that any funding we expend meets all the rules. And we're going to conduct all of the non-delegable responsibilities associated with landowner and producer eligibility. So after you've ensured that folks have the records, we're going to check the FSA system. Of course, we're going to work back and forth with you and make sure that if there are deficiencies, we communicate them to you. But we're going to ask you to communicate who your participants are and the fact that they've been told to go to FSA early so that you don't go out and do work with them and then find out they're ineligible. So there's going to be a lot of back and forth in this. The minimum expectation just to do these two tasks is that NRCS is going to always retain 5% of the overall funding in a project as TAI for NRCS use. Implementation TA is TAI. We're going to maintain that 5% to do this. If, as we negotiate our supplemental agreement, our programmatic partnership agreement with you, that first level instrument that Kari mentioned a minute ago, and it looks like, oh, hey, the partner didn't realize that they have to do X, the inventories to do an environmental analysis, for instance. And during those negotiations, you realize, and we realize that, hey, the partner doesn't have expertise in order to do that. It's going to be most expedient if NRCS does. Then we may end up having to take back, so to speak, some of that 5% TAI to support any work that we have to do that's over and above this minimum expectation level. So again, the idea here is that your proposal proposes how you think it's going to work, and ideally it provides us enough detail to select only those projects that absolutely hit the responsibilities between NRCS and the partner that we've talked about in the previous two slides. But if during negotiation we realize that maybe those responsibilities weren't fully elaborated and, hey, we have to shift X, Y, and Z around, the budgets in the project will be different than the budgets in the proposal. Next slide, please.
Well, Seth, before we move on, I'll just point out here on the second bullet that the folks who get awarded through this next round or this current round are going to benefit because the projects that we awarded last summer have actually gone through this process and are going through it now and working with state offices to figure out how to address this unique relationship of partners carrying out the project, but NRCS still having to do these landowner producer eligibility items, the NEPA stuff. So by the time, again, these projects that you all will be applying for get started, there will be some guidance in place and some folks that have blazed the trail to help everyone, do this in as streamlined a fashion as possible.
And one of those big ones we'll come back to here in a couple slides, because I think we've figured out the main way to make this easy for you guys and us, but I'll come back to that. So before I do though, and as mentioned on a previous slide, land eligibility really isn't changed by AFA projects. It's a Farm Bill program. We have to meet Farm Bill land eligibility requirements, and there are some sideboards on that. Private agricultural lands and non-industrial private forest lands are our principal target. Public lands are only eligible when they meet one of two criteria as listed in the APF, basically watershed-related work based on an approved watershed plan for the benefit of eligible lands, in a dam construct downstream, in an irrigation construct adjacent, has to be based on an approved watershed plan. The other place is going to be a little bit harder for partners and NRCS both to understand, because in an AFA construct, public lands that are producer controlled, say lease lands on Forest Service, for instance, are only eligible when the partner enters into a contract with the producer that will ensure benefit across the entire producer's operation, not just the public lands part. So you can see there's not a lot of flexibility for public lands here. And on the private land side, and on the producer-controlled side of all of this, whether they're public or private, they need to be registered with FSA. Next slide. So in addition to land eligibility, the producers themselves have to be eligible, which means that the producers associated with benefited lands have to meet the HEL and wetland compliance requirements of the Farm Bill, as well as be AGI compliant or have an AGI waiver. So the first one is never waivable. There's no way around that. The second one, as Kari mentioned early in his presentation, we do provide for both activity level AGI waivers and contract level AGI waivers. So if you run up against an AGI ineligible producer, but you really think that project is critical to the success of the overall RCPP project, we can probably get to a waiver, but we can't assure you of that up front. Next slide.
Yeah, and Seth, just for everybody's benefit, we're hitting these HEL wetlands requirements, AGI, and NEPA over and over again because we know that having gone through this the first time, these are critical concepts for applicants to understand, that they can't be waived other than AGI through this process just for these AFA projects. The statute doesn't allow for it, unfortunately. So we've got to find a way to make sure that when funding goes out, that's RCPP funding, producers, landowners, the land must meet these eligibility requirements.
So this slide is a biggie because what it really does is it delivers on Kari's promise from a minute ago that you're going to learn from our misadventures with the first round of AFA. In the first round of AFA, we looked at the proposals and we thought they looked great, and we selected a handful, 10, I believe. And then we realized that some of them hadn't clearly told us how they were going to address the NEPA and/or technical planning requirements of their project. How were they going to ensure that the work on the ground met the host of federal requirements that NRCS can't waive away just because this is RCPP? The way we can the way NRCS can facilitate your actions most expediently is if you follow NRCS planning procedures and practice standards. Those are both published things. The planning procedures are in the National Planning Procedures Handbook, and the practice standards are the Conservation Practice Standard Database. They're both out there. turns out NRCS has standards for everything from soup to nuts, fences to nutrient management. We've got a lot of practice standards, and we've got the technical requirements that sit behind those. And perhaps most importantly for you as partners, we have already done NEPA analysis, environmental analysis, on those practices that basically has concluded that they are benign if implemented in accordance with the practice standards. So if you follow the planning procedures and practice standards, you have the opportunity to say, hey, we're following your planning practice procedures, and we fill out this CPA 52, which is a form that says you looked at all the impacts, and there's nothing unusual. We want to use your NEPA document and proceed, and NRCS can sign off on that. That's the simplest way for us to get to approvable actions out on the ground. If you decide to do something that doesn't follow NRCS planning practices, procedures and planning procedures and or conservation practices, then you're looking at a slightly more complicated path. And this is the one that we sort of advise you to work around or to very explicitly plan for. It's not disallowed, but if you send in a project that says you want to do non-NRCS approved processes and you don't account for the time needed to get those processes approved, your project's not going to be viable and it's not going to be selected. So if you're not going to go with the NRCS planning procedures and practices, you're going to do something on your own. You're going to need to plan on a full environmental analysis and then cite specific confirmations afterwards. You can do it. It's just going to add, a little bit of complexity to your project. So we want you to work closely with your coordinators, to talk over with your coordinators what the activities are that you want to do on the ground, and figure out which of these two paths you can fit in, plan accordingly. If you end up in the second one, you may well want to add a year, a non-implementation year, technical analysis year at the upfront, for instance, to make sure that you can get to an EA. It may be 2 years. That's going to be a coordination discussion with your coordinator. Next slide, please. So that's on the land management and watershed side. On the entity held easement side, they're a little bit more straightforward. You're really just tied to conservation easements to achieving conservation benefits. We will have in AFA land what we're going to call minimum deed requirements. They will look similar but be less detailed than the classic entity held easement deed terms that are currently available on our website. You can look on our website for those classic entity held easement deed terms and get a foreshadowing of what our soon to be published requirements will look like. And in reflecting the change that Kari mentioned earlier about valuation methods, in AFA, starting with this 2021 Notice of Funding Opportunity, we are no longer considering the possibility of a U.S. right of enforcement in AFA entity held easements. Consequently, we are also capping the federal share at 25% of the diminution based on a use PAP appraisal. So that is a change from the prior one that reduces the amount of money effectively available, but also simplifies the process, we hope. Next slide, please. So in thinking through some of these implications for land management activities, they're going to be pretty straightforward if you follow our conservation planning procedures and you've got the technical ability to do that. Very minor deviations in our payment scenarios under those practices can be addressed fairly easily. But when you start to do more substantive changes to payment scenarios and or move outside of our practice standards, that's when things get potentially delayed and complicated. So we're going to ask you in your coordination with the coordinators to have an idea of those specific activities that you want to do, talk it over with them even in the proposal phase, and see if they can advise you whether existing practices and payment scenarios are going to be enough to get you where you need to be, or whether you need to plan for that first year of additional timing, environmental analysis, et cetera, to make sure you can get to a deliverable product. I can't overemphasize the importance of this. It's going to, if you can get to the NRCS conservation practice standards and planning procedures methodologies, you will streamline your lives. If you can't, you just have to plan accordingly. Next slide, please. And the public works side, this one is another area where our initial experiences, both in Classic and AFA, highlighted some oversights in our training and information provided. I'm going to try to hit some of those today. Basically, as we stay in the APF, a public works project has to follow traditional PL 566 processes for planning, design, and construction, which means during the planning phase, you have to do a site and project-specific environmental analysis and economic analysis that meets the requirements of the watershed program, watershed type activities that apply not only to NRCS, but also to other federal agencies. Those are called the Principles, Requirements, and Guidelines, PRNG. They are very detailed. And so the idea that you might be able to go out and build a watershed project in a hugely streamlined way in AFA is unfortunately not entirely accurate. You're still going to have gone through this planning step. We'll work with you, of course, and try to help you identify any places where we may be able to waive specific watershed requirements if they don't fit this project. But in the end, we can't get around the PRNG requirements for detailed environmental and economic analysis. So again, plan the first year or two of the project for that analysis, which has to fall within the 30% TA available to the project, both NRCS and partner responsibilities thereunder. May be complicated if it gets real complicated, getting that money to balance. So think it through in detail. Next slide, please.
All right, Seth, I'll just say quickly, let's try to move through this maybe in 5 minutes, the rest of the slides, so we can get to some questions.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So RCPP project in context, first we'll fund it, then we'll go out and do whatever planning's needed. That's probably going to be on you. The contracting here is also going to be on you. That RCPP contract that's mentioned here is really expected to be a combination of RCPP money and partner contributions, some flavor. We should not be funding all of this. You should work with the producer to get work on the ground, and then you'll come back to us and report outcomes. And I think we'll hit outcomes on the next slide, so we'll move on. All RCP projects have to report on at least one environmental outcome. It needs to be one of the environmental outcomes that you identify in your proposal, ideally your principal environmental outcome. Social and economic outcomes are optional, but if they are called out in your proposal and your proposal is selected, then they become required. So it's only the environmental ones that are always required. Don't overcommit if you're not really prepared to do those in your project. And we will coordinate with you on your outcome plan. Involves both state folks and headquarters folks. Next slide, please.
I'll just quickly say that, we've been pleasantly surprised at how many folks are picking up on the economic and social outcomes and doing producer surveys from a social perspective, or even bringing on partners that can handle the economic side. We encourage folks to do that. It's certainly an interest of the new administration, and I'll just leave that there.
So just sort of a recap, I guess, or maybe a what does all this mean in construct? If your project gets selected, you enter into negotiations. That negotiation concludes with the executed programmatic partnership agreement. There's no funding. That's your first step after selection. Whereafter, the lead partner becomes responsible for delivery of both RCPP funded deliverables and contribution deliverables and outcome reporting. We work with you to negotiate supplemental agreements, which actually obligate the funds for those eligible FA and TA deliverables. The TA deliverables will almost always come first. And within those supplemental agreements, each particular deliverable is going to require eligibility and payment valuation methods. It's going to be a close look once you get to that supplemental agreement level. Next slide, please. Then you'll manage the delivery of those supplemental agreement deliverables to the negotiated specs. You'll provide the required reimbursement and documentation of completion items that are negotiated in the supplemental agreement. We will look at those closely. We will verify producer eligibility, activities completion meets the technical requirements, and that the costs that you are requesting payment for do not exceed, and I'm going to add a little bit to the slide here. either the actual cost that the partner incurs, that's the maybe the more labor intensive, more accurate method for cost valuation payments. The other one is to use when land management practices are involved, and we have payment schedules. You can use the payment schedule amounts if they've been nationally approved. Those are really the only two methods that are available. So there's no estimates, is what I'm getting at. We can obligate in a supplemental agreement based on an estimate, but we can never pay based on an estimate unless it's tied to one of those nationally approved payment scenarios for like work. So that's a hurdle that some folks didn't realize was going to be in play. Next slide.
Yeah, and Seth is emphasizing that cost valuation piece because our friends at the either GAO or Office of Inspector General are very keen at looking at what our funding is going out for, and we have to be very careful when it comes to actual expenditures.
Thanks, Corey. I think we had one or two more slides. I can't remember.
I think that's right.
Critical notes. So as far as critical notes here, we're going to prioritize those projects where your proposal presents a very compelling case that you're going to be able to meet all of these requirements. You're set up to deliver FA and TA exactly as you propose. If you propose NRCS planning procedure and practice standard based methodology, your planners and designers need to be very familiar with those. If you're going with some other route, you need to be familiar with NEPA, and you need to have the capacity to deliver a NEPA document. And then you need to have the capacity to implement that other method. So we're really looking for projects where you're going to be able to do all the work, and that you demonstrate the technical ability to do that. We also don't just want an engineering firm that might well have all those technical abilities, but doesn't have the relationship with producers to get in and then not know how to find an eligible contractee. So we also need you to demonstrate that you've got good producer networks out there and that you've had experience working with producers and landowners. Next
yeah, and
slide,
on that,
please.
well, on that first bullet, just real fast, you might notice in the funding announcement that we leave open the door for NRCS to carry out more of the technical assistance for these projects. We do that because the statute says it. But again, because that will get messy real fast, our goal is to select projects where the lead partner and the partnership at large has the capacity to fully carry out the FA and TA activities, minus those items that we cannot delegate that we talked about earlier.
Okay, so as far as our evaluation process goes, be a little different than what you may have heard about the classic process. For the AFA projects, because they are in this smaller pool, they will all be ranked nationally, with states basically asked to provide feedback as well. Those two sets of feedback will be passed forward to leadership and final decisions will be made. In order to apply, we ask that you respect the deadline in the proposal. We really cannot overemphasize, particularly in AFA projects, the importance of coordinating with your state coordinators early and trying to get to an implementable project. The state coordinators cannot tell you what to put in your proposal. They can't help you write your proposal, but they can certainly educate you on where you may look for our references, some of those technical requirements that I talked about, who might be available, whether there are conservation districts in your state who have some of the expertise available. They can give you some of that as kind of input. They can't write your proposal for you. So that's kind of a funny line, but still one that you need to tackle early and often. The AFA proposal guide should help you with the software component principally. You do need EOF level 2 permissions. Those can take, literally weeks. So we strongly encourage you to get your EOF going tomorrow if you think you're going to apply. If you never use it, it costs the government a little bit of money, but you don't end up yourself at the end of the road and not able to submit your proposal because you don't have EOF. So get that EOF sorted out early. Similarly, for your portal access, once your EOF is in place, you can request portal access. That's all in the AFA proposal guide, and that should help you there. Your state coordinator, state coordinators are on the web page, and Kari's email address is up there on the screen.
Seth mans that inbox 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So please, we do ask folks to please touch base with your state coordinator first. They are often the best person to answer your questions. That national inbox, is a secondary resource for you should you have questions that you're not able to get answered through your state coordinator. So with that, I realize we do not have a whole lot of time, but we do have some time here by which we can try to answer some questions that have come in through the chat box. And I think I've been able to pull up a few here, so I'm just going to jump in and start answering them. We have a question that says, can the state NRCS office be listed as a partner on an AFA proposal and be responsible for executing contracts with farmers? The answer to that is no. Again, the AFA design is structured such that the partners have to be able to contract with producers, landowners, and it's not going to run through NRCS as RCPP Classic does. If that's what you're looking for, you may look at the next RCPP Classic funding announcement, which will be coming out this summer. Okay, the next question. We've got a few questions in here about indirect costs. If I'm not mistaken, the funding announcement goes into some exhaustive detail about this. By statute, RCPP cannot pay for administrative costs or what we define as indirect costs, but they can be used. Unrecovered indirect costs can count in some circumstances as partner contributions. And I would just encourage you to take a close look at the funding announcement for how to calculate your unrecovered indirect costs if you want to count them as partner contributions. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add, they are limited in the APF as well on the indirect costs. So please read that section closely.
Yep, very good. Let's see, can we include contributions that would be expended from the time of RCPP AFA award announcement? The answer to that is yes. This should be outlined in the funding announcement. By statute, any partner contributions expended after the day that we make the award announcement, as long as NRCS is okay with them. So you need to check in with your state coordinator once your name is called or you see your name on the press release or your organization's name to make sure that those partner contributions are going to be eligible to count for your project. But the answer to that question broadly is yes. Okay, there's a question about partner contributions and the fact that some of these are large dollar projects and what types of contributions are eligible. We go into this again in some detail in the funding announcement. We can accept both cash and in-kind contributions, and those are sort of defined there's in some detail there in the funding announcement. Just encourage you to look at that very closely.
The one thing I'll add on that one is that contributions are broadly acceptable as long as they're in the project area and benefit the project resource concerns. They can't just be in the project area and they can't just benefit resource concerns. And they ultimately have to be accepted, as Kari's prior answer implied, in the programmatic partnership agreement. So if you have real specific questions about the timing or whatever, look both at the APF and talk to your coordinator, because there are some limits that can limit you there. Shouldn't run into them as long as you're talking to that coordinator and getting them sorted out, but they are real.
Okay, I can't remember if I said this one before, but there's a question here about tribal lands and whether they are eligible. The answer to that is yes. So here's a question that says, you said 10 project proposals have already been funded. So does that mean that only 5 can be funded under this announcement? No, the answer to that is no. We are limited to 15 each fiscal year. So it's not the life of the Farm Bill, but each fiscal year. So the 2020 announcement, we funded 10 out of 15. We have another 15 we can fund through this current funding announcement. Let's see, there's a question here. It says, we are based in DC. Which state coordinator should we contact? Well, that's an interesting question. So you would want to talk to the state coordinators where you're planning to carry out that work. So if you are a DC organization and you plan to carry out an urban ag project in DC, well, then you should contact that rcpp@usda.gov email inbox. Otherwise, you're going to want to talk to the state coordinator or coordinators in the states in which the work will be carried out.
I'm the one who wrote that question. What if the producer or landowner is themselves based in DC?
Yeah, as I mentioned, if it's an urban agriculture project that is going to be carried out in DC, we don't have a state conservationist or a state office here in DC. So again, I would just touch base here with the national team at rcpp at usda.gov.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Let's see. I see a hand up, and it's hard for me to tell whose hand that is. But if your hand is up, if you want to unmute yourself, if you're able to do that.
That's me. I don't have a chat function for some reason, so I raised my hand. But I'm in an area where we have a lot of public lands that are upstream of downstream agricultural producers, and a lot of the projects that we're looking at would be occurring on those public lands to benefit the downstream users that are producers. But my question comes down to that FSA eligibility for public grounds that are not associated with a specific agricultural producer through a lease. What specific eligibility requirements do we need to meet to make those grounds be eligible?
Good question. It's a very specific set of circumstances where public lands, where we can spend RCP funding on public lands. Seth went through them earlier, but I'll try to walk through this again. One is where there's a mosaic of public and private lands under a producer's control. We see this a lot in checkerboarded lands out west. In those cases, as long as the project and the activities are going to benefit the operation as a whole, as Seth mentioned, we can work on those public lands. The other one is in the case of a public works or watershed project where there's like a flood control project, you're building some sort of dam structure for water supply or something like that. That can be carried out on public lands as long as the benefits from that project will accrue to eligible lands, i.e. or e.g. Ag lands or non-industrial private forest land. And so if you're trying to carry out activities on public land that is not a watershed or public works activity, then RCPP is not going to be the program for you.
I think this one is consistent with what you're talking about for those watershed projects. I just was confused about what specific eligibility requirements we would need to meet to demonstrate that.
Well, you just would have to demonstrate that the benefits from the project would accrue to the private lands downstream of the public lands.
So is that through like a mapping exercise or modeling? Like
the vehicle for that demonstration in the watershed project activity case is the watershed plan or equivalent. And the PRNG gets into some detail about demonstration for water control projects of the eligible beneficiaries, etc. You're going to have to document in your watershed plan, if it's a habitat project, for instance, and it's not those classic flood control things, you're going to have to demonstrate that tie textually in a map, etc., in such a way that you ultimately convince NRCS that there are eligible beneficiaries. Not terribly difficult necessarily, but there has to be a real demonstration.
Excellent, thank you.
All right, we're going to take one more question. Stephen has his hand up, and then I'll talk a little bit to wrap this up. Go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I wanted to ask if there's an anticipation of the most recent RCPP Classic recipients being announced prior to the close of this. So entities that maybe were applying for the one don't over leverage their staff or commitments by applying for the other.
That's a great question. We did spend some time thinking about the overlap here. So if anyone has applied to RCPP Classic from the last go around, which was a combination of FY20 and 21 funding, we're planning to announce those here in mid to late April. And again, so there would be a substantial amount of time after that still available, as this doesn't close until the end of May. So I know that there's other questions in the chat box. As I mentioned earlier, we plan to put an FAQ document with all these questions up on the RCPP How to Apply page. That's the national RCPP site. We also have a bunch of questions from NRCS staff, which is great, but we have been prioritizing those questions that have come in from potential applicants. So we will get back to our staff members internally here. And just want to thank everybody again for joining today. We're really excited to get this next round of AFA proposals in. We think we funded some really interesting and innovative projects last time, and they're just now getting off the ground. And we look forward to seeing your applications here toward the end of May. So thanks very much, and good luck.